Earlier this year, I joined with Representative Gowdy to introduce H.R. 4138, the Enforce the Law Act, to put a procedure in place for Congress to initiate litigation against the executive branch for failure to faithfully execute the laws. But while that legislation passed the House with bipartisan support, the Senate has failed to even consider it. So today we consider a resolution to authorize litigation by the House to restore political accountability and enforce the rule of law.
Let us be honest for a moment here. America is a litigious society. We have become conditioned to file a lawsuit against anyone, anywhere, and for almost any reason at the drop of a dinged fender or a dinged reputation. We love to sue. But when the matter at hand is Congress suing the President of the United States, new can of legal worms are opened. And America is left to wonder what is really happening and, honestly, why. Joining us to engage the debate here on MidPoint, he is the president of Frontiers for Freedom, a public policy think tank devoted to promoting a strong national defense, George Landrith, and Washington correspondent with the Talk Radio News Service and hails from the left, Justin Duckham joins us. Gentlemen, thank you so much for being here today.
Great to be here.
Tell you what, George, I'm going to go ahead and start with you. George, you get the first shot in all this here. Americans want to know, seriously, does this need to happen? Are we really suing the president, and is it going to get anything done?
Well, you know, the interesting thing, the answer to do we need to sue the president is no, we don't. But we're in a state now where the president's gone from hope and change to so sue me, and he doesn't abide by the law. It's become an impossible situation. I think Republicans would like to pass certain bills and reform, but they realize that it doesn't matter what the law says. It's simply he'll just do what he wants to do. And so they feel like they're between a rock and a hard place.
Justin, you have to agree with the comment here that people just think the president has snubbed his nose at the lawmakers underneath him and said, I will do what I want, I don't care, sue me if you want, have a wonderful day. You got to admit that that does seem to be the perception the American people are looking at.
Well, that may be true, but we have a system in place with the Constitution wherein the Congress and the White House have their own forms of checking and balancing each other, and it seems a little uncomfortable to be bringing this to the usual American court system when this is something that historically has been able to be resolved within the confines of Congress and the executive branch.
But what happens then when you can't get those branches to work? Because I think we're at what may be an historical dysfunction here between a president and Congress and a split party. Both parties split here. So in essence, don't you have to do something to break this logjam?
You certainly do, and whether or not this lawsuit is going to be the answer to that, I think it's clearly not the case. I think we have a president who is using executive power to break that logjam, and as a result is irritating quite a few people on the right, but so far has still remained within his executive authority, even though he may have had to rely on it much more than many people would feel comfortable with.
George, is he breaking a logjam or simply sticking his nose in the air at lawmakers?
Well, I just think it's very funny that when the president does things that he's not authorized to do, he refers to it as a logjam the president's breaking. But when Congress is going to the courts to effectively ask the president to abide by the Constitution and the law, it's somehow extra constitutional. I mean, this is the problem, quite frankly, is that the president. This is an example. During the government shutdown, Congress said they would pass a bill keeping the government open, but granting waivers to a broader section of the American public for Obamacare. Obama said they were terrorists, so this is unacceptable, and then shut the government down. Then, within weeks, announced that he was going to do some of the very things Republicans had asked him to do. So it's not even that the Republicans won't do things he wants them to do. It's that he doesn't want them to do them. He wants to be seen as the one doing them. He wants these confrontations. He wants things to appear broken, and then he wants to be the person to break the logjam.
Maybe this is, though, let me interrupt you for just a second here. I want to get something else in here real quick. I want to get this in while you're talking about it. I want everybody to see this, a quote from Representative G.K. Butterfield, a Democrat from North Carolina, a former judge. This was a quote made to the L.A. Times on Wednesday that I think might put this in an entirely different perspective here when we talk about suing. Quote, do you really want to cede to the courts the authority to resolve disputes between the branches? Would you want the president to sue the House for missing a budget deadline? How would it end? End quote. You got to admit something in here, George. This is a good point. Do we really want the courts and judges basically to make these decisions?
Well, generally, no, I don't. Generally, what I'd like, I don't want every time there's a dispute between the House and the Senate, or between the legislative branch and the executive branch, to go to court, because ultimately these are political issues. But I do believe there's a time and a place, and we've had this throughout our history. I mean, Marbury versus Madison, which is one of our first cases, was ultimately about an executive power and whether or not they needed to do something, or whether they could just sit on their hands and not do something. And the court held that it was appropriate for the court to step in and say, no, you're required to do this. So I would argue that from our very early stages, there are some disputes and some actions that demonstrate bad enough faith on behalf of one party that, and there is no other actual remedy, that this is what has to happen. I mean, I just don't. It's not an answer to say the president can flout the law. You can get quotes of the president telling you that some of the things that he's currently planning on doing, he says he doesn't have the authority to do. But now, of course, he's magically acquiring that authority.
Okay,
I don't know how you fix this without.
I'm going to stop you there. You don't have to fix it, but 1 second. I get that. But let me quick. I need to go right now to Justin, because in your opinion, Justin, and I'm going to come back to you as well on this one as well, George, but is this about Barack Obama, or is this about the Affordable Health Care Act? That, I think, is something that needs to be answered. Which one is it really about?
Well, I think they're both kind of lumped in together. At a certain point, it's called Obamacare for a reason. But I think this is more about the midterm elections that are coming up. And I think it's even more about maintaining Boehner's authority as Speaker. We know that there's been quite a few Tea Party candidates and quite a few conservatives who have been less than satisfied with his performance so far. They've been killing legislation that he's been putting forward left and right. The most recent version of that was, of course, seen yesterday when it came up with the new border bill, which was already stripped down and made concessions to, and that ended up not going to the floor. And I think this was an attempt by Boehner to try to get those people back into the rank and file by showing that he is sort of a tough guy and can take on the president. And I think the fact that this is still not being considered enough for quite a few of them, or is being laughed off by some members of the rank and file, shows what kind of a precarious situation the Speaker is in with this lawsuit.
All right, well, I tell you what, George, I'm going to give you the same shot at this. Is this about an attack on Barack Obama or going after the president, or is this in reality all about Obamacare?
Well, I believe it's about Obamacare. That's what the suit's about, and I think it's the four corners of the document will tell us what it's about. I think what we've seen here is there's a law that's passed. It has clear provisions, and the president just simply disregards them and then says that he has some latitude in his implementation of the law. And while it's true that a president does have some latitude, it's not to disregard the plain black letter language. It's just there in black and white on the paper, and say, oh yeah, part of my implementation powers, I get to ignore things I don't like and change things that I view as politically unpalatable. It's not going well, so I'm just going to grant these waivers and change the law on its face, because from a political perspective, I didn't write this law that well. My friends didn't write this law that well. It's blowing up in our face, and so the Congress has offered to help him rewrite the law, and he just says no. They offered to give the very waivers that he's been giving, and he said no, and called them terrorists in the process. And then, of course, he doesn't. So I think that it is true that in Washington there's a certain level to which things are broken, and I would argue that it is the president who has broken them.
Okay,
because
Justin.
He simply has become a lawless rogue. He does whatever he pleases, and whether it's declaring that the Senate is in recess when it's not, even though no president's ever had the authority to determine when a branch of, when a House of Congress.
Okay, I got to stop you there 1 sec. I only have about 60 seconds left. Quick, Justin, I'm going to give you a chance. Or doesn't this make everybody look foolish one way or the other?
It certainly does. We are a litigious society. But, I think when you point to the recess appointments, that was resolved without having a high-profile lawsuit like this, and I see no reason that we can't have the traditional means of going about things come in place here. And it's, if this is a serious lawsuit, it's a weird coincidence that is happening in the middle of silly season in the lead up to the midterm elections.
Hey, George, 15 seconds. Is this silly season?
No, well, it's certainly election year is silly season, but I don't think this is. I think the president running around talking about how, go ahead and sue me. I think it's just incredible to watch a president of the United States who's become this glib and this detached from what's going on in Washington and spends his time golfing and saying sue me.
There we go. All right, we'll make that the last word. George Landrith, Justin Duckham. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us. Have a great weekend. We'll do it again soon.
Thank you.
Thanks.
All right, guys, later on this hour, money and myths as the new job figures are out. And up next, a new feature here on MidPoint, Cityscape. We'll introduce you to that and a whole lot more when we continue right here on MidPoint.